I'm Franklin. You know the story of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Most people remember February 14th, 1929, for the red roses and the box of chocolates. But in Chicago, the only thing red was the snow in a garage on North Clark Street. 7 men, lined up against a brick wall, executed by what looked like the city's finest in blue uniforms. The history books call it a mob hit, Al Capone's final answer to Bugs Moran. But history is written by the winners, and the winners in Chicago usually have a badge and a seat at the mayor's table. Jack Donovan sat in his office on South Dearborn, the neon sign of the Atlas Hotel, across the street flickering rhythmically, casting long rhythmic bars of light across his desk. The room smelled of stale coffee, cheap bourbon, and the faint, persistent scent of gun oil. Jack was a private investigator, which was just a polite way of saying he was a man who knew exactly which palms to grease to get a straight answer. The door opened without a knock. She walked in like she owned the building, or at least the air inside it. She was draped in silver fox fur that looked like it cost more than Jack's car, and her eyes were the color of a stormy Atlantic. This was Claire Vane, a torch singer from the Green Mill whose voice could make a grown man cry and whose connections could get him killed. "My husband was in that garage, Jack," she said, her voice a low, steady rasp. She didn't cry. Women like Claire didn't have time for tears. They had time for leverage. "Arthur Vane, he was a bookkeeper for the Moran gang, Claire. He knew the risks," Jack replied, leaning back and lighting a lucky strike. "He played with the big boys. He got the big noise." "Arthur didn't know a Tommy gun from a typewriter, Jack. He wasn't a gangster. He was an auditor." She leaned over the desk, the scent of Chanel No. 5 momentarily overpowering the stench of the office. She slid a small leather-bound book across the scarred wood. He stayed late on the 13th to finish a second set of books. Not for Moran, for Mayor Big Bill Thompson. Jack's hand froze midair. The ledger was small, unassuming, but in Chicago, it was a live grenade. "He called me 20 minutes before the shooting," Claire whispered. "He said he found something, not just bribes, Jack, not just protection money. He found a line of credit coming from Washington. Massive sums, labeled Sub-Level Stability Initiative. He said the men coming for him weren't Moran's rivals. They were the cleanup crew." Jack flipped open the ledger. The columns were neat, precise, the work of a man who loved numbers. But as his eyes scanned the entries, the hair on his neck stood up. The dates matched the accidental deaths of 3 federal judges and 2 reformist senators. Beside the names were amounts that could buy a small country, all funneled through Al Capone's primary distillery. "If this gets out, Claire, the city won't just burn. The whole country will tear itself apart," Jack said, his voice barely a whisper. "That's why they killed him, Jack. And that's why they're coming for me." Suddenly, the heavy glass of Jack's office door shattered. Not from a brick, but from the synchronized burst of 2 Thompson submachine guns. Jack dived across the desk, tackling Claire to the floor just as a hail of .45 caliber slugs shredded his filing cabinets, turning 10 years of cases into confetti. The shooters weren't shouting mob slogans. They moved with military precision, the heavy soles of their boots thundering in the hallway. Jack reached for the .38 in his desk drawer, but he knew the odds. In Chicago, the law didn't protect you. It just made sure the bodies were buried deep enough that the taxpayers didn't complain. "We need to get to the south side," Jack grunted, the plaster dust from the walls coating his tongue. "If we're going to survive the night, we need to find the man who sold out your husband. And I have a feeling he's sitting in a police station counting his silver." Chicago in the winter is a cruel mistress. The wind off Lake Michigan, known to the locals as the Hawk, doesn't just blow. It bites, slicing through wool coats and skin alike until it finds the bone. It's a city built on the slaughter of cattle, and that metallic, heavy scent of the Union stockyards always seems to linger in the air, a reminder that in this town, everything and everyone eventually goes to the hook. Jack Donovan felt the sting of plaster dust in his lungs as he pressed his back against the mahogany wainscoting of his office. The air was thick with the gray, acrid smoke of burnt gunpowder. Outside, the neon sign of the Atlas Hotel flickered, blue, red, casting a rhythmic, hellish glow over the carnage. Claire Vane was huddled beside him, her silver fox fur stained with white dust, her breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches. She wasn't screaming. She was too smart for that. In Chicago, a scream is just a target for a second burst. Rat-tat-tat-tat-tat. Another drum of .45 caliber slugs tore through the office door, shredding the frosted glass until it looked like jagged ice. Jack could hear the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots in the hallway. These weren't the erratic footsteps of a panicked hoodlum. These were the synchronized, measured strides of men who had cleared trenches in the Argonne forest. "The window, Claire! Now!" Jack hissed, grabbing her elbow and steering her toward the frosted pane that looked out over the alley. He kicked the glass out, the shards tinkling like piano keys as they hit the frozen cobblestones 3 stories below. The fire escape was a rusted, iron skeleton clinging to the brick wall. As they scrambled onto the metal grating, the office door behind them was kicked off its hinges with a thunderous boom. Jack didn't look back. He knew what was there. Men in police overcoats, but with eyes that held the cold, detached void of the state. They descended into the bowels of the city. The alley was a canyon of shadows, smelling of wet cardboard, coal soot, and the sweet, fermented rot of discarded mash from a nearby speakeasy. Jack led Claire toward a nondescript iron plate in the ground, a coal chute that led into the secret veins of the city. Chicago wasn't just built on land, it was built on a labyrinth. Below the streets lay a world of tunnels, miles of freight narrow-gauge tracks designed to haul coal, but now used by the outfit to move the liquid gold that kept the city's heart beating. "Where are we going, Jack?" Claire's voice was a whisper, lost in the roar of the wind. "To the catacombs. It's a transit tunnel beneath the loop." Jack grunted as he pried the iron lid open. "If the men in blue are hunting us, we go where the light doesn't reach." They dropped into the darkness. The air here was warmer, humid, and heavy with the smell of grease and stagnant water. Jack clicked on a small brass flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, reflecting off the damp, brick-lined walls. He pulled out the ledger, Arthur Vane's death warrant. In the flickering light, the columns of numbers looked like a code for the end of the world. Jack traced his finger over an entry from January 12th. Shipment 402, biological stabilizers. Destination, Warehouse 14, Calumet Harbor. Payee, the Janus Group. "The Janus Group isn't a gang, Claire," Jack muttered, his brow furrowed. "That's a shell corporation out of D.C. They handle logistics for the Department of Justice. Why is Al Capone's bookkeeper tracking federal assets?" "Because the outfit isn't just selling booze anymore, Jack," Claire replied, her voice echoing in the tunnel. "Arthur found out they were using the distillery trucks to move something else, something in lead-lined canisters. He said the men at the harbor didn't look like longshoremen. They looked like scientists." Jack's mind raced. The Crimson Valentine, the massacre in the garage, wasn't a hit to consolidate power in the underworld. It was a sanitization. Arthur Vane had seen the ledger where the mob's profits met the government's black budget. The 7 men in that garage were the only ones who knew that Al Capone wasn't the boss of Chicago. He was just the department head of a much larger, much darker enterprise. Suddenly, a low mechanical hum began to vibrate through the tunnel floor. Clack, 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 clack. A freight trolley, a small, electric flatbed used for moving crates, was approaching from the shadows. Jack dived behind a stack of rusted oil drums, pulling Claire with him. The trolley crept into view, moving slowly. Two men stood on the back. They weren't wearing police uniforms. They wore heavy, rubberized aprons and gas masks that made them look like giant, eyeless insects. In the center of the trolley sat a single, silver canister, frosted with condensation. "Wait for the signal," one of them rasped, his voice muffled by the diaphragm of the mask. "The mayor wants the test run completed before the funeral for the Clark Street 7. We need the panic to be at its peak." "What's the radius?" the other asked. 6 blocks. The south side won't know what hit them. We'll call it a tragic outbreak of influenza. The press is already briefed." Jack felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. They weren't just covering up a murder. They were preparing a massacre. The Sub-Level Stability Initiative wasn't about politics. It was about population control. A test run for a toxin delivered through the very tunnels that kept the city fed and drunk. "We have to stop that trolley," Jack whispered, his hand closing around the grip of his .38. "There's 2 of them and 1 of you, Jack," Claire said, her hand trembling on his arm. "No," Jack replied, his eyes narrowing as he watched the trolley pass. "There's the 2 of them, the ledger, and the fact that they haven't noticed the leak yet." Jack pointed to the back of the canister. A small, rhythmic hiss was escaping from a faulty valve, a faint, greenish vapor curling into the damp air of the tunnel like a ghost. The clock wasn't just ticking for Jack and Claire. It was ticking for every soul in Chicago. And as the trolley disappeared into the darkness toward the heart of the city, Jack realized that the Valentine's Day Massacre was just the opening act for a much larger tragedy. There's a specific kind of silence that exists only in places where people are expected to die. It's not a peaceful silence. It's a heavy, pressurized vacuum, like the air inside a diving bell. As Jack and Claire moved deeper into the transit tunnels toward Warehouse 14 at Calumet Harbor, the city above them, the Chicago of glittering gin palaces and roaring jazz, felt like a dream dreamt by a man who was about to wake up in a grave. The smell changed as they approached the harbor sector. The damp, earthy scent of the brick tunnels was replaced by something sharper. The biting, antiseptic tang of industrial cleaners and the faint, sweet aroma of fermenting corn mash. It was the scent of the outfit's largest distillery, a fortress of brick and iron that pumped out thousands of gallons of rot-gut whiskey every week. But tonight, the whiskey was just a camouflage for a far more potent brew. "Look at the pipes, Jack," Claire whispered, pointing a gloved finger at a series of new copper conduits running along the ceiling. Unlike the rusted iron of the city's water mains, these were polished, fitted with pressure gauges that hummed with a low-frequency vibration. "Those aren't for booze," Jack muttered. He adjusted his fedora, the brim casting a sharp shadow over his eyes. "That's high-pressure gas delivery. They're using the distillery's ventilation system as a manifold." They reached a heavy steel door marked with a faded sign, "Property of Chicago Freight and Tunnel Co. No trespassing." Jack pulled a set of skeleton keys from his pocket, tools of the trade that had opened everything from cheating husbands' apartments to police evidence lockers. With a rhythmic, metallic click-clack, the lock groaned and gave way. They stepped into Warehouse 14. The space was immense, a cathedral of industry. Huge copper stills, 3 stories high, rose into the darkness like the idols of some forgotten god. Steam hissed from valves, and the rhythmic thump-thump of the boilers sounded like the heartbeat of the city. But the men working on the floor weren't the usual grease-stained thugs in flat caps. Through the haze of steam, Jack saw them. A dozen men in crisp, white lab coats, their faces obscured by the same insect-like gas masks he'd seen in the tunnel. They moved with a clinical, detached precision, pouring canisters of a thick, emerald-colored liquid into a secondary mixing vat that was shielded by lead-lined curtains. "The Janus Group," Jack breathed. "They've turned Al Capone's cash cow into a biological laboratory." "Jack, look up there." Claire gripped his arm, her nails digging into his wool sleeve. In a glass-walled observation office overlooking the floor sat a man who didn't belong in a laboratory or a garage. It was Commissioner Harrison, the man in charge of the Chicago Police Department's internal affairs. He was sipping a glass of clear liquid, likely the only unpoisoned gin in the building, and checking his gold pocket watch. Beside him stood a tall, thin man in a charcoal gray suit, his face a map of scars from a war that the newspapers said had ended 10 years ago. "The Colonel," Jack whispered. "The man who organized the hit on Clark Street." "We need to get closer, Jack. If we can get a sample of that green liquid, or a photo of the commissioner with the Colonel." "Photos won't save us now, Claire. We need to shut down the manifold," Jack said, his eyes scanning the network of pipes. "If they open those valves, the south side will be a morgue by sunrise, and the mayor will use the panic to declare martial law, effectively handing the city over to the Janus Group." They began to creep along the shadows of the catwalks, the steel grating beneath their feet cold and unforgiving. The sound of the machinery was deafening, a symphony of grinding gears and hissing steam that masked their movement. But Jack knew that in a place this sterile, even a shadow could be a witness. As they reached the main control valve, Jack saw the ledger, Arthur Vane's final testament, clutched in Claire's hand. He realized then that the numbers weren't just bribes, they were a schedule. 2 a.m., ventilation sink. 2:15 a.m., distribution start. 3 a.m., sanitization of witnesses. Jack looked at his own watch. It was 1:58 a.m. "We have 2 minutes, Claire," Jack said, his voice hard as flint. "I'm going to create a diversion. You take the ledger and get to the harbor police, not the city cops, the Coast Guard. They're the only ones the Janus Group hasn't bought yet." "I'm not leaving you, Jack." "This isn't a movie, Claire. It's a massacre. If that ledger doesn't make it out of here, Arthur died for nothing." Jack stood up, drawing his .38. He didn't aim for the men in masks. He aimed for the red-painted pressure relief valve on the main boiler. Bang! The sound of the shot was followed by a shriek of escaping steam so loud, it felt like the building was being torn in half. White, scalding vapor flooded the floor, blinding the men in the lab coats. "Go!" Jack roared. But as Claire turned to run, a cold, metallic voice rang out over the intercom system, cutting through the chaos like a razor. "Detective Donovan, I was wondering when the ghost of the stockyards would show up. You're late for the revolution." The colonel was standing on the observation deck, his Luger aimed directly at Jack's chest. The commissioner sat behind him, calmly closing his pocket watch. "The cycle of history, Jack, is built on the pruning of the weak," the colonel shouted over the roar of the steam. "Chicago is overgrown. Too many mouths, too much dissent. We are simply applying the cure." "The cure is a bullet, you bastard!" Jack yelled back, firing a second shot that shattered the glass of the observation window. The warehouse erupted into a war zone. The scientists pulled submachine guns from beneath their lab coats, and the air was suddenly filled with the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of suppressed gunfire. Jack dived behind a heavy iron pillar, the slugs sparking off the metal. He looked toward the exit. Claire was gone. She'd disappeared into the steam, but the manifold was still humming. The green gas was beginning to hiss through the secondary pipes. The Valentine's Day Massacre was about to have a sequel, and this time, the whole city was on the list. They say that when the devil wants to destroy a city, he doesn't use fire. He uses silence. As the clock in Warehouse 14 struck 2:15 a.m., the silence was broken by a sound that would haunt Jack Donovan's dreams for the rest of his short, violent life. The hollow, metallic thrum of the primary valve's opening. It was the sound of 1,000 lungs being prepared for a harvest they didn't know was coming. Jack pressed his shoulder against the iron pillar, the cold of the metal seeping through his wool coat. The warehouse was now a landscape of white steam and emerald shadows. The green vapor, the cure, as the colonel called it, was beginning to swirl at the base of the massive copper stills, heavy and cloying, looking like a toxic fog rolling in from a nightmare. "Donovan, you can't stop the pressure," the colonel's voice boomed from above, distorted by the echoes of the cavernous hall. "The manifold is locked. In 10 minutes, the ventilation shafts for the entire south side will be pumping salvation into every tenement and speakeasy from here to 63rd Street. Jack looked at the main control board. It was guarded by 3 men in gas masks, their MAT-49 submachine guns leveled at the only entrance. He was out of ammo for his .38. And his side felt like it had been branded with a hot iron where a stray slug had grazed him. Then, through the shifting veil of steam, he saw her. Claire Vane hadn't left. She was perched on the high catwalk directly above the mixing vats, her silver fur coat discarded, revealing a sleeveless black evening dress that made her look like a vengeful shadow. In her hand wasn't the ledger. She'd tucked that into her garter, but a heavy glass bottle of high-proof grain alcohol from a nearby crate. She caught Jack's eye and gave a small, sad nod. She knew what had to be done. The distillery was a powder keg. All it needed was a match. "Claire, no!" Jack mouthed the words, but the roar of the boilers drowned him out. Claire didn't hesitate. She smashed the bottle against the pressurized steam pipe. The high-proof spirit ignited instantly against the red-hot metal, creating a localized fireball that lit up the warehouse like a second sun. "Flank him!" the colonel roared, but his men were distracted by the sudden inferno above. Jack moved. He didn't run. He lunged, grabbing a heavy iron wrench from a workbench and throwing it with every ounce of desperation into the cooling fan of the primary generator. The metal screamed as the blades shattered, sending shrapnel flying through the room. The lights flickered and died, plunging the distillery of shadows into a strobe-lit hell of orange fire and green gas. Jack scrambled up the ladder to the observation deck. He found Commissioner Harrison cowering behind his mahogany desk, his gold watch forgotten on the floor. "Where is the override, Harrison?" Jack growled, slamming the man against the glass. There is no override, Donovan. It's a one-way trip. The colonel, he has the key to the external vents." Jack turned just as the colonel stepped out of the shadows of the hallway. The man moved with a terrifying mechanical grace. He didn't use his gun. He drew a long, serrated combat knife, the kind used for quiet work in the trenches. "You're a relic, Jack," the colonel said, his voice almost gentle. "You believe in right and wrong, but the Janus Group believes in order, and order requires a clean slate." They collided in the dark. It wasn't a fight from the boxing rings. It was a struggle of teeth and nails, a desperate scramble for survival on the edge of a burning precipice. The colonel was a professional, but Jack was a man who had nothing left to lose but his city. As they rolled near the shattered window, Jack felt the colonel's knife bite into his arm, but Jack had his hand on the colonel's throat. With a roar of primal rage, Jack surged forward, driving both of them through the jagged remains of the glass window. They fell 30 feet, crashing through a wooden loading platform and into the icy, black waters of Calumet Harbor. The shock of the cold was absolute. It felt like being hit by a freight train. Jack fought his way to the surface, gasping, his lungs burning from the faint traces of the green gas that had escaped into the air. He looked back at the warehouse. The fire had reached the main alcohol reservoir. The explosion was beautiful in a terrible way. A pillar of blue and orange flame erupted into the Chicago sky, visible for 20 miles. The shockwave shattered every window in the harbor, and the green gas, diluted and burnt by the immense heat, dissipated into the winter wind, neutralized before it could reach the city's lungs. The next morning, the Chicago Tribune ran a headline that would make any honest man sick. Tragic accident at Harbor Distillery. Bootlegger carelessness leads to massive explosion. There was no mention of the Janus Group, no mention of the green gas, no mention of the commissioner's presence in the building. The 7 men from the St. Valentine's Day Massacre were buried, and the city moved on, blaming the mob war for the violence. Claire Vane was found 3 days later, wandering the south side with a burnt dress and a look in her eyes that suggested she had seen the end of the world. She still had the ledger, but when she tried to give it to a trusted journalist, he was found dead in a bathtub 6 hours later. The ledger disappeared into the deep, dark pockets of a federal evidence locker, never to be seen again. As for Jack Donovan, some say he drowned in the harbor. Others say a man matching his description was seen boarding a tramp steamer heading for Havana, with a permanent limp and a scar that ran from his ear to his jaw.